Good evening and welcome to the MiniMed 670G Q&A training webinar. Our guest speakers tonight are Megan Stephenson, Senior Training Specialist at Medtronic, and Lucy Casson, Nurse Practitioner at Total Diabetes Care. My name is Kieran Buckman and I'm part of the marketing team here at Medtronic Diabetes, and I will be your host for tonight's Q&A session. To get things kicked off, I will introduce you to our first speaker, Lucy Casson. Lucy has extensive experience in helping children and their families manage type 1 diabetes, and currently she works in private practice at Total Diabetes Care. How's it going?
Very well, thank you.
Fantastic. Our next speaker is Megan Stephenson, Senior Training Specialist at Medtronic. Megan has a significant experience in the diabetes division over a decade, including face-to-face education with both patients and healthcare professionals. How are you, Megan?
Good, thanks, Karen.
Fantastic. So let's dive right in. Megan will kick things off by talking about all the new features of the MiniMed 670G.
Thanks, Karen. I'd like to start by saying this is an exciting opportunity that we have today and moving forward, to be able to introduce you to the MiniMed 670G. As you know, the 670G is commercially available in the US, and you may have seen a lot of information on the internet about its outcomes and its availability and its benefits. At this point in time in Australia, the MiniMed 670G system, that includes CGM, is not regulatory approved. So the 670G insulin pump on its own is, but the CGM is not. So for today's webinar, I'm going to be discussing and taking you through the 670G insulin pump as a standalone pump in pump-only mode. There are various components of the full system. So when I speak about pump-only mode, I mean the pump on its own without CGM. Then there is two other modes with CGM, and there's Smart Guard modes. Smart Guard manual mode, which is the same as 640G, with suspend before low and suspend on low. And then there's Smart Guard auto mode, which is the hybrid closed loop component. So we will be running extensive education programs once we have regulatory approval for the CGM. And so we will keep you abreast of that. The reason why we're doing this webinar tonight is to make sure that you are ahead on the changes in comparison from 640 to 670, as we will be starting to ship insulin pumps, the 670G. So we'll be shipping them from November. So we just wanted to keep you ahead on that information. So to start, I'd like to take you through the product offering. So the product, the insulin pump on its own, as you can see, looks very familiar and looks very similar to the 640G. The present blood sugar meter that is sent with the 640G is compatible with the 670G as well. So the patients will not have to change meter. The insulin infusion sets are exactly the same, so they do not change once the patient goes to a 670G. And the CareLink Black USB that you're familiar with will be compatible with the 670G. And then CareLink software, so we now call it the CareLink system, and that is the web-based system. That includes CareLink Pro on the web and CareLink Personal, both web-based. They are compatible with the 670G. So as you can see, it looks very pretty much the same as the 640G. There are some small changes to the face of it, and that is predominantly in the home screen. The directional up and down, left and right arrows are exactly the same. They will move around the menus to the right, to the left, up and down. The back button which you can see there on the left, and it will take you back a screen. But if you hold it down, it will take you back to the home screen. The select button is now going to be used for access to all menu items instead of the menu button, which was on the 640G. The notification light will remain the same, and that will flash if there is an alert or alarm that the patient needs to respond to. The graph button is new and is in the same place as once was the menu button on the 640G, and that will be used to access sensor graphs. The features of the 670G are the same in pump mode as the 640G. So the bolus wizard calculator is available. A patient can do a normal bolus, square wave, dual wave bolus, have remote bolus features, preset bolus, and easy bolus. That does not change from the 640G. Basal delivery in pump-only mode without CGM will still deliver programmed settings, be able to deliver a temporary basal rate and preset temporary basal rates. A manual suspend is available on the 670G just as it has been on the 640G. The home screen looks a little different, as you can see, in comparison, and the reason for that is now the bolus and basal menus are inside the main menu, so not on the home screen. And you once were able to access all the status screens for pump, for the insulin amount and battery amount, for the last BG, the last bolus, all that information now does not sit on the home screen, sits inside the main menu under the status menu. You can see here that the main menu looks a little different. You access on 670G through the select button, and essentially there's another layer to the menus, which we will show you shortly. Like I said before, the bolus and basal menu are now not on the home screen. You click the select button and go to the main menu, and there you will see bolus, inter-BG, and basal. To access any setups of insulin settings or delivery settings, they will sit inside these two menus. You'll note now there is a new inter-BG menu, which is available for patients that are not using a linked meter, and they can enter in extra BGs or BGs from another meter in here. So if you're looking to access the setup of your bolus or basal settings, the way to do that is to go to the main menu and choose delivery settings. We used to, on the 640G, you use insulin settings. It is now called delivery settings. So you go into main menu, choose delivery settings, and then bolus estimate setup or bolus wizard, and then basal pattern setup for setting up your basal patterns. So just to summarize on the changes from the 640 to the 670, insulin settings is now called delivery settings. Access to the main menu is via the select button. There is a new options menu, which you will find the history, the reservoir and tubing access, delivery settings, and utilities. There are new icons against every menu option, and there is a new status location. So if you need to find out what the latest notifications are, what information about the amount of battery or insulin or latest bolus or BG information, that sits in the status menu inside the main menu. To recap, changes to the home screen, a new access to the main menu, a new look to the main menu in terms of menu icons. We have new status menu. You access the reservoir and tubing through options. And for delivery settings, which were once called insulin settings, you now go through the main menu, the bolus or basal menu to delivery settings and choose either bolus estimate setup for bolus wizard, or to set up any basal patterns, choose basal pattern setup. I'd like to now hand over to Lucy Casson, who's going to take us through the CareLink reports. Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks, Megan. So I'm going to take you through some of the CareLink reports. And before I start, I just want to reiterate what Megan said at the beginning, is that we're going to be looking at these reports using 670 as a standalone pump. So there's going to be no CGM information in this. Okay, so I'm just going to go through these. And it's important to note that the CareLink reports for MiniMed 640, for the VEO, and for the older systems won't change. So therefore, the therapy dashboard, the adherence report, the sensor and meter overview, logbook, device settings, and daily detail will all still be available for these models of insulin pump, and therefore your interpretation methodology can remain unchanged. So for the MiniMed 670 at this time, as I said, there will be 6 reports available for interpretation. 3 of these, as you can see, will be new reports. 3 of them will be the existing CareLink reports that you're used to looking at. And the 3 new reports are going to be the assessment and progress report, the weekly review report, and the meal bolus wizard report. The daily review, which is the last new report there you can see, is presently still being developed based on feedback from users and planned for the next software update. So these reports are available for the CareLink system on the web and not for the desktop software version. So it's important that if you're expecting to have patients starting on MiniMed 670, that part of their preparation is to move on to the web-based CareLink software. So the CareLink Personal for patients is already compatible with the 670G, and you can see the 3 reports that you're used to using along the bottom there. So the first of the new reports for the MiniMed 670G is the assessment and progress report that you can see here. And I'll take you through this. As you can see, it's for blood glucose entry only, with currently no CGM data available for you to see there. So as you can see in this report, it will display similar information to the therapy dashboard, which you've been used to with the 640G. So when CGM data is available, there'll be opportunity to see the sensor data overlay in percentile comparison, time in range data, patterns of hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia, and relevant information of SmartGuard technology. So the relevant information for use in pump only and blood glucose data is in the statistics. So as you can see, there's now an opportunity to compare the 2 periods of pump use. So when you see A, it's your most recent, the information you're looking at today, and where you look at B, it's comparing the last time that the report was looked at. So really useful for comparing if you're in clinic with a patient, what were the settings last time. So the information available that you can see in this example are the average blood glucose level, how many BGs the person is doing per day, the total daily dose of insulin, the breakdown of basal to bolus ratio, and a new feature, how often your user is changing their sets, how many meals per day have been entered, and what amount of carbs were entered for each day on average. And you've also now got the ability to see insulin action time on this report here. So for the weekly review in the MiniMed 670G, the reports are similar to the sensor and meter overview in the current CareLink reports for the 640 and in other previous pump models such as the VEO. What you can see, however, is that the colors are a lot more vibrant, and I think it's a lot easier to read. So the report's really useful to see the glucose events, your postprandial and post-correction trends, and it appears in 7-day segments. So this might assist the clinician in determining the need for insulin adjustments based on what you're seeing in this report. So taking a closer look at this report, what you can see is where you see the green shaded area, this is indicating a target range of 3.9 to 10 millimoles. Now the green line set at the target range of 6.7 millimoles. This is because when using a certain mode of SmartGuard and CGM, when you're using CGM compatibility, the target will be set at 6.7 millimoles. The active insulin you can see is shown in light purple after each bolus. So where you see a bolus, you then also see the action of the insulin profile afterwards. The basal rates are then shown as solid pink lines with solid pink dots indicating where the patient has done a manual suspend. And then your dotted pink line indicates where the patient has run a temporary basal rate. So the bolus in the purple lines or the blocks, you can see there's a difference in them. It's dependent on how that bolus has been delivered. So for example, where the patient may have given a dual wave or a square wave bolus, and then the amount in purple. So if there are multiple entries inside a 3-hour time block, those numbers of entries will be shown numerically next to the total. So you can see an example here of where there's a number in brackets, and that indicates how many boluses have been given in that 3-hour example. So this is particularly useful for clinicians when we're adjusting settings, that you can actually zoom in and have a closer view of where, for example, the patient's had a high blood glucose level of 17.8, for example, in this first block, and then they've given a bolus of 4.3 units, and then you can see the profile afterwards and have a look several hours later of what effect that correction has had. So looking at the meal bolus wizard will be particularly useful when patients are obviously using CGM. But for this example here, the patient only has blood glucose information, so you can still use it to see the total number of boluses per meal within a certain time bracket. There's also the carb ratios at various meal times if the patient has different ones set for different times of day, and you can see the average amount of carbs per bolus. You can also see on this report the average units of insulin per bolus. And then, as I mentioned, when it's with CGM information, there'll be an awful lot more there to review. So as highlighted earlier, an additional report that we've got here that's being developed is to gain more granular detail from a daily perspective. And here we've got a test example to give you a bit of an idea of what it might look like once it's been developed. So you've got your total basal and total bolus information available. It will also include event markers. So for example, the duration of exercise, and you can see here the little green man running and a duration of shading for how long that exercise was for. There's also detailed information of each bolus given, including whether the patient's overridden the pump and also the bolus wizard calculations. The other thing you'll be able to see is the time in range when the patient is using CGM and also where the pump has suspended and prevented hypos occurring. The adherence report you will all be familiar with, but for those of you who aren't, what you can see is the days down the side of the particular time block that's been looked at. You've got across the top the amount of BG readings done on that day. Obviously, we've got no sensor duration information because this is just standalone pump. On the next section with bolus events, you can see how many times the patient has done a manual bolus, when they've done bolus wizard events, how many per day, and where they've involved food and correction, and also, which I find particularly useful, when the patient may have overridden what the bolus wizard has recommended. On the second part of this report is the rewinds and cannula fill and tubing fill information, which at a quick glance enables you to see how often the patient's changing their infusion set, whether they're filling the cannula if they're in fact wearing a cannula or a steel set. And it's just, again, a quick glance for adherence reasons to see, are they changing it frequently enough? And then on the last column, you can also see how many times in this example the patient's pump has been manually suspended. So the logbook report, again, most of you will be familiar with. It's a really useful tool to be able to identify trends and to have a quick glance and see, obviously you've got color coding information of when sugars are above, within and below target. So within is obviously not highlighted, above is in orange and below target is in red. So like the old-fashioned reports when patients would manually write their sugar levels down, this is a great report to be able to look at your blood glucose levels, your carbs entered, and your bolus amount, and whether there's been a correction involved. So from a clinician's point of view, you're able to look at correction only, for example, if you've got one, and have a look at what the results have been afterwards in order to help determine things like, do you need to change the insulin sensitivity factor? Do you need to look at changing carb ratios? Or in fact, you need to look at changing the basal rates? The device settings page, again, is exactly the same as the existing reports you've got. So you've got your basal rates listed there. If a patient is using any more than one basal profile, they will also be listed under basal 2 through to 8. You've got your maximums there. You've got your carb ratios, insulin sensitivity, and blood glucose targets. So just as a summary, what we're looking at is we've got those 3 brand new reports, which we've just gone through. We've got the daily review report, which is currently still in development. And you've got the 3 familiar reports that you've been used to looking at as your logbook, adherence, and device settings.
Thank you, Lucy. That was a very informative breakdown of CareLink reports. Let's just jump in and answer a couple questions that some of our attendees sent through. Thank you for sending through as well. We'll jump into those right now. So Megan, I think this one would be good for you. Both very similar questions. Why is the target set at 6.7 millimoles? And can we actually adjust the glucose target to that 4.5 to 6 millimole range for better control?
Thanks, Karen. As discussed, there are 3 modes for the 670G, the pump alone, which we've discussed today, SmartGuard manual mode, and then SmartGuard auto basal. These questions relate to the settings inside the hybrid closed loop and the auto mode. So, and until we have regulatory approval for CGM, I'm unable to answer that question without context to clinical evidence, for example. There's a lot more to discuss around that question. So we are going to be following up with some extensive education around auto mode, and we'll be able to address that question at that time.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Okay. And I believe that is a wrap. So thank you everyone for tuning in for tonight's webinar. We hope you found it very informative and insightful. And a special thank you to both Lucy and Megan for being a part of tonight's event. Have a great evening, everyone, and thank you. Good night.